Hello everyone, I hope you guys are doing great. So today we'll be having Dee Zheng with us, who is the managing director of Orca Climate Fund and a climate tech enthusiast. So I'll be asking him some questions related to climate tech and the possible innovations in the same and how they can solve the existing climate related issues. So without a further ado, let's welcome Dee. Hello Dee, thank you so much for joining in. I hope you are doing great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah, I'm good. So first of all, I would like you to basically introduce yourself, mentioning where are you currently based at and what are you currently working on.
Sure. So my name is Dee. I'm based in California, U.S., sunny California. Despite you see the cold, this is the climate change part we all know about. Unfortunately, I am currently the managing director at the Orchid Climate Fund. We are a nonprofit evergreen fund that's dedicated to investing in pre-seed climate tech startups. And the nonprofit part means that all cash on cash returns from the fund goes on to catalyze future climate tech startups rather than having a decided, let's say, 7 or 10 year fund life and being returned to LPs. We look to invest in climate tech startups of all stripes, but predominantly in the pre seed stage. We're not limited by necessarily sector or technology.
Okay, that sounds really awesome. So as you have already mentioned that you are into the climate and so if you can mention the reason behind your inclination towards climate and related things.
Sure, absolutely. So, in my own background, I originally, when I came out of school, I went to Wall Street as a bulge bracket investment banker. I was actually one of the analysts at Lehman. As I tell many people, I was not responsible for Lehman's downfall. I take that for as how you will. I was the energy market analyst at Lehman in the early 2000s. So we saw things like, well, kind of kids tends to be one of the major names in our sakes. There was a lot of crap in that state, but it got me more interested than rather than less interested in the energy markets. But what really got me inclined to climate is when I moved on later in career. After moving on to private equity and consulting, I was traveling through China, where my ancestral homeland is. The This is where my grandparents were still living, so I was taking them out on vacation. I drove them out toward the outskirts of the city, and you have this one part of the sky within the city which is nice green and sort of blue, beautiful kind of beach sort of sky, and the other part of the sky just split into a pink, black, and purple. It's only something that you would see in a cartoon drawing, maybe. The color were very vibrant, and there was a black crack in the sky in the middle. I was like, what the hell was that? Well, I didn't say hell. I think I used a far more explicit word, but something close to that. And so I came back and did a little bit of research. Apparently, so China at that time was still embroiled in coal power plant. And it still is coal power plant generation, and that had a pronounced effect on air quality, as you can imagine. So what I ran into was the outskirts of town, where 13 coal plants was generating power for necessary for the city to uprun its hospitals and major life support, but also choking every single resident in it. That's sort of got started my journey into climate, my entrepreneurship in the company trying to solve that air quality problem, and then my eventual journey into investment in terms of helping out other entrepreneurs who went through the same journey that I did.
Okay, so the effect that you have mentioned, was it the or actually with the name of aurora borealis, the effect in the sky?
Oh, it was much worse. So when you think of the Aurora Borealis, it's more of a phantom, like it's a light show where it's sort of a coloring, a scrape, a veil upon the sky. This was literally the sky itself was that color,
Oh,
the entire sky.
oh,
Um, yeah, I mean, one side was orange, and when it came to the divide between the two, it eventually became pink in the middle and a purple right in the middle, and then there's a dark crack in the black. Black. It, it, it's something that I still describe that people can't imagine because until you see it, you don't realize how bad it can be.
So like as you have mentioned that like you are having like Orca Climate Fund, like you are managing director of that. So if you can throw some light on the works that basically organization is currently doing and has done previously.
Sure, absolutely. So the Orca Climate Fund was born out of the generosity of the founders of the Orca exchange on Solana. It's a decentralized exchange for efficient transaction of cryptocurrency and NFTs, other manufactured. The founders have, or I would say, since the start of the Orca exchange, dedicated a portion of the trading fees to pledge it to climate. Um, what they hadn't figured out at the start was what's the most efficient way to do that. So, like originally, the Orca Climate Fund was named the Orca Impact Fund, and they, in the first years of existence, it donated a $550,000 check to the Ocean Conservancy for various projects to be administered by the Ocean Conservancy, which is a very well-known and large multinational NGO. So the current iteration was when members of the community came up to the members of the governing council of Orca and said, well, with the continuous fees that comes from the Orca exchange, we could do something a little bit more leveraged and impactful. Because paying for projects is good, but like given the dollar for impact ratio, it's probably not the most impactful, given how we're not exactly risk averse, especially given the climate fund. Like literally, the first check was giving all 100% of it away. If you can maintain that sort of risk profile, you can create a far greater impact if you're willing to take greater risk at the start of, let's say, a company's inception journey, where they have a greater need for capital.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that's sort of the origin of the Orca Climate Fund. We right now we've invested in well, four companies. A bunch of them, I wouldn't say call them, describe them as any particular sector. As I said, we're not focused on any sector or technology in particular. We invested in one company that's in alternative leathers. We invested in a company that's in composts. We invested in a company that's doing things that's like geospatial data for project development. So these are very different companies and very different sectors, but the commonality is that they are all very early stage, and they have some difficulty in finding capital at the early stage that their inception in one way or another. This is where we find ourselves additional.
Okay. So like I've seen in your LinkedIn profile like the terms like carbon markets, carbon offsets, decarbonization, etc. So like if you can briefly explain about these terms so that the general public can understand that.
Oh, do you want the long-winded or the short-winded answer? Because I don't know how many hours we have.
Yeah, I think like the short way works. Yeah.
The carbon markets, you have to split that into two different entities. We have what are called the compliance markets and what are called the voluntary markets. The compliance market, funny enough, was born out of a bunch of rogue environmentalists and conservative politicians. So it was a very strange marriage in between. If you Do you know the Environmental Defense Fund?
No.
Oh, it's one of the largest nonprofit environmental nonprofits in the world. It has
Okay.
probably one of the oldest history as well. So its our unofficial motto has always been "Sue the bastards." But back in the '90s, a bunch of environmentalists within the EDF came to question the effectiveness of that. Well, because it turns out people don't like being told what to do.
Hmm.
So they came together with conservative politicians at the time, and they came up with what's called a cap and trade scheme. That's the genesis of a emissions trading cap and trade system, which is the compliance market today. What it does is we'll tell all the companies what's the maximum amount you can emit, but we'll allow you to pay for that in different ways. So you can pay for a different company that could presumably reduce their emissions in a cheaper way than you can, and then claim that as your own, as that different company then would still cast off their emissions allowance to you. That's what the compliance market is. The voluntary market is a little different. voluntary market began as two, how should I put this? So they were two consultancies trying to think of ways to help carbon project developers in third world countries, especially non-developed countries, expand their reach. Because back in the 1990s and early 2000s, the only carbon market on the world was the Kyoto Protocol. And the
Okay.
Kyoto Protocol gave national carbon markets kind of determinations, but no determinations to individual projects. So, what's not covered under the Kyoto Protocol was designed by these two consulting agencies and then passed on to an international nonprofit, became the voluntary carbon markets. It was began as a way for large companies to pledge what their climate willingness and signal that to their consumers in a way that's concrete and measurable. That's the genesis of voluntary carbon markets.
Okay. Yeah, and the carbon offsets?
So the carbon offsets essentially was what they use as a signal. They measured their emissions, carbon emissions from the ground up, right? So let's say I have a car as a company and I have $40,000 company vehicles. I measure how much gasoline they use, and I say I buy emissions from a project from the voluntary carbon markets that reduces emissions by as much as my 40,000 car fleet emits every year, and that's my offset. So by buying that project, somebody else is reducing the emissions that my 40,000 car fleet is causing, and therefore I reach a zero account.
Okay, yeah, and that process is known as like decarbonization.
That's actually not decarbonization. That
Okay.
is just reaching net zero.
Okay.
Decarbonization is going into your company saying, I need all 40,000 of those fleet cars to become electric or
Hmm.
reduce their emissions all the way to zero. That's decarbonization.
Okay.
But carbon offset is a part of the decarbonization strats. It should historically people have recognized that certain industries have entrenched legacy infrastructure. For example, if you look at plastics, right? Plastics has always been a huge problem for environmentalists. But if you try to replace plastic infrastructure, we're talking trillions of dollars of extruders. We're talking trillions of dollars of manufacturing equipment from the ground up, and you just replace it with, let's say, biomass somewhere and uh, scrape it together and say we'll produce that infrastructure from scratch. That's not likely. So, what bridges you from the present to the future where this you'll have a completely decarbonized infrastructure, and that theoretically is carbon offsets.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so like like in your opinion, like what is the future of climate tech? Yeah, because like there are a lot of innovations being like done in that field, and also like in like normal technical field like AI, generative AI, and like blockchain and all. So like how these innovations can contribute to it, and how basically they can solve the climate related issues, and up to what extent in your opinion?
So I think I'm very excited about the potential for climate tech for innovation in the future. And there's a lot of frontier tech that I think what you mentioned here in terms of AI, and even what I mentioned like geospatial and blockchain. But
Hmm.
there's also everyday tech. Because if you look at the problem of climate today, a lot of it is not because we're not using the latest or the fanciest stuff. It's just because we're using things that don't make sense. Right?
Okay.
Like look at the food waste we have in landfills today. We have how many tons of methane emissions from landfill every year just because we waste what 50-80% of the food in our food system, and that's climate tech, so to speak, right?
Okay.
You talk about non-obvious application of blockchain. Well, why isn't that food being traced? Why is it wasted? Why is it not placed on the shelves? What is wasted in the process from the food transport process to the grocery shelves themselves, right? What percentage of food gets thrown away because you can't account for the bullwhip effect of the transport infrastructure? Why is that not implemented, right? And a lot of that technology we already have, like fully matured, and doesn't need um, developing some sort of advanced. I mean, no offense to fusion, like no 20 years of R&D required. but it's just a matter of implementation. What are the key leverage points? What does it take to replace the incumbent infrastructure? And what would it take for people to be willingly to take replace the incumbent infrastructure? Because remember, people really don't like being told what to do, right?
Yeah. Okay, so like as you are saying, like yeah, I think like it seems like humans are the problems to the climate. So like if we assign that problem to AI, like especially like the advanced AI like that we have seen in the movies like Avengers, Ultron and all. So so like it will
I
come
mean,
to
that was an AI. That'd be probably an immediate solution. I find it
yeah.
funny because I was hosting one of these talks at the LA Tech Week, and one of the students at my talks, we were coming up with solutions to immediate problems that we were talking about. We were talking about circular economy, and one of the student groups, joking, probably not joking, came and said, "I think the easiest way is just put a control device on everybody." And then making sure everybody do exactly what's right instead of what they want to do. But that's the frustration point, right? It is the hard point for us as well. Like if I were the AI, if you ask me what's the easiest way to counter climate change, yeah, get rid of all the humans, right? Get rid of 90% of the humans. Climate change should go back to you. Is that practical, feasible, or even humane, or morally correct? Probably not,
We have to
right?
ask like a peaceful way.
Right. So I think, the difficult part and probably the challenging and enjoyable part of my job is trying to align this expectations that people like what they're doing. Like, let's say people really like to eat meat. People like to enjoy their economic comforts, right? People don't want to go back in a place, well, most people don't want to go back in a cave and, lift off the, let's say, without toilets, modern flushable toilets in some sort.
Yeah.
So how does that align with the fact that we have to reduce consumption or long term reduce the mechanism for consumption in the future, right? Or align consumption in a way that reduces emissions. And that's the interesting part of this about this job.
Okay. So like in your opinion, like the problem like will be bigger or like it will be like break down into smaller chunks and will be solved eventually.
I mean, it will always get worse before it gets better, right? And if
Yeah.
you ask me if we hit rock bottom yet, I think that's the first part of the question. I don't think so. We haven't hit rock bottom yet, right?
Oh.
I haven't seen people panic yet, but probably not too far off, if I may knock on wood. Do we think we can eventually tackle it? Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Now, like I said, the tools are there, the willingness is there. I don't buy in the doomerism perspective that, just because human are the entrenched problem that we're never going to solve it, because there are always ways to get around and try to solve it. Like there are ways even in different sort of economies. Let's say a capitalist approach that isn't going to solve it. You've seen different countries under different system tackle in different ways. Um, I think the more difficult problem is how soon will we solve it, and then what kind of your present lifestyle or infrastructure will remain, and how much of that will resemble the life that you've known.
Yeah.
And that is a much more difficult question, right?
Yeah, actually, like the funny thing, like here is like we are basically trying to like habit actually we are basically trying to make like moon and Mars like as habitable, and we are making the Earth as uninhabitable.
Oh man, were you invited to New York Climate Week? Were you there?
No.
Because I think there were a bunch of people at New York Climate Week walking around with a T-shirt that said "Fuck Mars." That's a
Okay.
response to that. Yeah, I you know I think if your future vision is that Earth is not inhabitable, we're just going to Mars. That is one extreme outcome. Like if it comes to a perpetual outcome, there's also extreme outcome where saying people are not going to act fast enough, where the technology curve is not going to bend fast enough, where we're going to have some of the more frontier solutions like direct air capture scale and time. Then we're going to have to go toward more radical Earth engineering like radiative forcing. You know, which has come into the climate tech conversation. nowadays. Um, I don't think we're quite at that point yet, depending on our trajectory. There's quite a lot of technology, there's quite a lot of willingness, and there's quite a lot more people interested in climate tech today that we don't have to be there, but it's part of the scenario.
Okay. So, like the last for last, like any advice or suggestion that you want to give to the young like entrepreneurs who are building something in this like domain of climate tech, and like how they can remain motivated in the difficult market situations and build.
Right.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I love what you're doing. Um, you should love what you're doing too, because you got to realize, and I haven't realized this for a long time. You know, I spent a long career going through private equity. I hated it. Investment banking. I hated it. Consulting. I also hated it. Like it's not a. It's rare to find a job that you love working for and allows you to, you know, still earn a living doing that. So enjoy that. The second part is that realize the word that you said about it. You are in a market opportunity, so trying to find how the market mechanism works. The biggest pain point I have, my own pain point with climate tech entrepreneurs, is that depending on their stage of maturity and development, they don't focus always in on what the customer's problem is. So they have very much an engineer's um, lens, which is like, here's the problem I set out to solve, which is great. I mean, you solved the problem that you saw, but is that what the customer wants? Because I mean, I operate out of fund that uses a market mechanism. What that means is that you have to have a product or service somebody wants or
Yeah.
buys, right? Before you have a business. And that somebody wants or buys can't be the owner of the business, because then you have a circular business in every sense. I'll just buy what I own produce. That's not a business, right?
Yeah, it's like
The number,
first building the solution, then finding the problem.
yeah. I mean, I see that to be the most common problem. A lot of people trying to will build it, will they come? And like in the blockchain world, like most common startups seems to be marketplaces, right? Because they find blockchain to be efficient application of the financial mechanism. Well, what's important about market mechanisms? You look at legendary investors like Bill Gurley. They've already solved it for 20 years or more. They said the most important thing about marketplaces is aggregating demand, right? Where is your demand coming from? The other things tend to be secondary. But what we find most common about entrepreneurs trying to build in this space is that they try to aggregate supply, and demand will come. Um, where? That's the only question I have. Like, where is it coming from?
Mm.
Right? So if you are a entrepreneur trying to build this space, make sure you know the customer, know where they're coming from, know why are they buying from your customer, and they may not turn out to be exactly what you thought, and that's okay, right? I have had endless portfolio companies that have different customers for different stages of their startup. They're not going to always have it figured out, but having that focus to be always listening to identifying, that's what separates a successful entrepreneur building their startup and to the exit, and a somebody who's just, you know, frustrated and just hitting at walls all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing that you have mentioned, like it's not only basically stick to the climate thing, like it's common for every domain, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
I would say it's just more common in climate because we have such technically brilliant people working on this space. And
Okay.
it's always such a joy to look at it because you never know what you walk into. At the same time, it's frustrating because they are so brilliant, they get lost in that. And it's like, so then who buys this contraption? Right?
Okay. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So like it's really nice catching up with you. I think that's pretty much it. We have covered everything. So
So it was great catching up with you too.
yeah.
I hope, you know, Shamba's doing well. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope you're enjoying
Yeah. Definitely. And
despite the climate change, the weather outside.
yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing a lot of valuable information. Means a lot to me.
It's great.
Great.
Catch you
Bye.
later.
Bye.
Bye.
So I hope you guys have got some valuable insights from the podcast and get to know about Dee and his amazing work at Orca Climate Fund. And as you guys are already aware about climate change being a serious issue and becoming a real thing of concern day by day. So let's strive together to make this earth a better place. And thanks for watching. See you soon in the next video and wishing you guys a very happy new year.